Fuck over here. No, back here. Wow. Aren't we lucky to have heard that original recording of two children playing with a ball back in 1543. Pretty amazing. And makes you think, really, that nothing has changed with children back then to how they are today. Hello, and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. Today, we're looking at another sonnet, of course. If you came here expecting to not listen to a sonnet, then unfortunately, you've chosen the wrong podcast. You should be listening to another one. Because what we do on this podcast is look at sonnets, Shakespeare sonnets, and we break them down, try and work out what they mean, and then make up a stupid little story about them. That wasn't a great sales pitch for the podcast. If I was trying to get funding, probably wouldn't get funding from that. But, you know, who needs funding, eh? When you've just got yourself and a microphone in a room in your flat. Studio. A professional studio. Anyway, today we're looking at Sonnet 58. A classic. Well, not really a classic, actually. It's definitely one of the more forgotten ones. And it is a sort of continuation of last week's 57. I only realised that when I looked at Sonnet 58. And it said a continuation of Sonnet 57. So thanks for that, Shakespeare. Would have been nice to know earlier. But it's a part 2, if you will. Shakespeare's done a few of these in the past. Sort of part A, part B, part 1, part 2, however you want to label it. So let's dive in to Sonnet 58. That God forbid, that made me first your slave, I should in thought control your times of pleasure, or at your hand the account of hours to crave, being your vassal bound to stay your leisure. Oh, let me suffer, being at your beck, the imprison'd absence of your liberty, and patience tame to sufferance bide each check, without accusing you of injury. Be where you list, your character is so strong that you yourself may privilege your time to what you will. To you it doth belong yourself to pardon of self-doing crime. I am to wait, though waiting so be hell, not blame your pleasure, be it ill or well. So there we are, we're still on the theme of Shakespeare saying that I'm going to be your slave and I'll do whatever you want and I'll wait patiently and you just go off and you have a good time. I'll just be here, I'll always be here, waiting for you, however long that may be. Very patient guy is Shakespeare, so it turns out. This is so similar in its themes to Sonnet 57. I'd say, do we need it? If we're looking to cut out some sonnets, probably 58 could go. It's nice, it's definitely nice, but 57 sort of covered all of the I'm your slave type thing, I thought it did it quite well. So another sonnet about that. Do we need it, or is this filler? Waiting for the next big sonnet, one of the big hitters. Just a question. Something to ask Shakespeare if he ever comes back to life, or we get to chat to him at some point in the future when we can regenerate bodies or something like that. I think it's about time we dive into this line by line and try and work out what the hell Shakespeare was going on about in Sonnet 58. That God forbid, that made me first your slave, I should in thought control your times of pleasure, or at your hand the account of hours to crave, being your vassal bound to stay your leisure. Now that was 4 lines, but this is all one thought really. And he's saying that God, whichever God it was that made me your slave, because that wasn't me, that was a God that decided that, of course, may he never allow me to even think about having any control over when we see each other, or let me ask, how you are or what you've been up to. So let that never, I will never do that, okay? Because that God has made me your slave, and let him never allow me to question when we see each other and get annoyed about that maybe, or to even, ask what you're up to, how you are, have you seen anyone else recently? That sort of thing. Let that never happen. And then being your vassal bound to stay your leisure, vassal being sort of man back in the day who would agree to fight for their lord or king in return for some protection, etc. So essentially a slave in many ways. But they did have a bit of power, I suppose. Anyway, so he's saying, I'm your vassal and I'm bound to you. Bound to stay your leisure, which basically means I'm your vassal, and I'll always be knocking about, waiting to do whatever you want me to do, to see you, to hang out, whatever. So he's really putting himself on the line here, isn't he, Shakespeare? He's saying much the same as Sonnet 57, as I said before, but, I'm always here, I'm your slave, I'll be hanging about, don't worry about me. Listen, you go off, have a great time, whenever you want me, give me a call. Probably wouldn't be a call back in the day, of course. They didn't have phones, but, drop me I was going to say DM, definitely didn't have Instagram. No, drop me a just an old-fashioned note, I guess. Pop that in the post. Did they have post? I don't know. Anyway, just get in touch, however we did back in the day, and I'll be ready to hang out and be with you. Oh, let me suffer, being at your beck, the imprisoned absence of your liberty. So this essentially means let me suffer, imprisoned while I wait for you, while you're gallivanting around, while you've got your liberty. Let me just sit and suffer. God, he's really putting himself down, isn't he? And patience tame to sufferance bide each check, without accusing you of injury. So he mentioned this in the last sonnet as well. Let me be patient and control my patience and just endure the disappointment of not being able to see you and not blame or accuse you of hurting me. So I'll just get on with it. Don't worry about me. Hey, you go off, have fun. Don't worry about me. And he backs that up in the next section, which is, be where you list. Your character is so strong that you yourself may privilege your time to what you will. So go off, do what you want, do whatever you want, and I mean anything, because he's gonna say something quite wild in the next little section. But he's saying, go off, do what you want. It is your privilege to do that, to do whatever you want, to be free. Unlike poor old me, who's just sat here imprisoned, waiting to see you. Nightmare for Shakespeare. I mean, he's put this on himself. He's making all this up. He's not actually this guy's slave, is he? He could do whatever he wanted as well, but he's put himself in this position, which is pretty strange. Maybe this is, sort of what he thinks the recipient of the sonnet wants from him. And if this is what the recipient of the poem wants from him, then I'd say it's pretty toxic demands. We're back onto the old toxic relationships that Shakespeare seems to get himself into. To you it doth belong yourself to pardon of self-doing crime. So this, I believe, is saying you can even pardon yourself of any crime you do. You've got that much privilege and freedom, which is insane. Shakespeare can't make that rule up for this guy. He can't tell someone that they can go off and do a murder or a rape or anything like that. You can't say you can go and do any crime. I don't know why I went to murder and rape. I mean, he could just be talking about shoplifting, but those are the big ones. I mean, he is saying any crime, isn't he? So he's saying you go off, do any crime, doesn't matter. You can pardon yourself of that because you're so amazing. Which is an absolutely insane thing to say. Suppose this guy took this sonnet really seriously and then went off and did a murder and then was like, well, yeah, it's fine though because I actually just got a sonnet from Shakespeare saying that I could do it. That's not going to fly with the police, is it? They're not going to accept that as an excuse. Or maybe they are. If Shakespeare had that much power, they go, oh, really? What, Shakespeare sonnet? Oh, amazing. Which sonnet was that? 58. Wow. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's incredible that you actually got a sonnet written to you by the Shakespeare. Yeah, of course. Absolutely fair enough that you did a murder. Maybe that is the way it would go. I don't know. How much sway did he have back then? And now we're on to the final couplet. I am to wait, though waiting so be hell, not blame your pleasure, be it ill or well. So I have to wait around, even if it is feeling like hell, it's feeling hellish, and I'm not to blame you for your pleasure and your desires, even if those pleasures are bad or good. So I don't know what those bad pleasures. I mean, I guess that's going and having sex with other people, maybe. In Shakespeare's head, he's like, look, that does suck. He's talked about this before in sonnets, where he said, look, it would suck for you to go off and have sex with other people, but I just have to endure that. So I think that's what he means by be it bad or good. So good, obviously, you go off and have a great time, meet some friends, hang out, have a few drinks, see some great sights, stuff like that. Bad, you have sort of loads of sordid affairs and stuff like that. I just have to endure it. So really, in a nutshell, this sonnet is very similar to 57. He's saying, I'm your slave. I will wait patiently for you. You can go off and literally do whatever you want. You can do a murder if you like. Not up to me. That's fine. And I will wait patiently while you go and fill your desires. He's a very, very patient man, is Shakespeare, in this set of sonnets. And I was going to say I respect him for it, but I actually don't really respect him for it. I think it's truly insane what he's saying he would do for this person. Maybe I'm just too selfish to devote my life to someone like that, but that's just, God, it's no life, is it really? Self-imposed slavery. Not for me. Now I think it's about time we put this to our story that I make up every week on the spot, completely improvised. You probably wouldn't be able to tell because it's so succinct and beautifully told, I'd say. Not to big my own storytelling up, but wow, these stories could be Pulitzer Prize winners. If you remember last week, Shakespeare sent his cat Mercutio off across the world to Barbados to deliver this message to Christopher Marlowe, the famous writer, of course, and he's had to flee London to Barbados for some unknown reason. We don't know that yet. That's a key bit of detail that we don't know, and hopefully the storyteller will be able to fill us in on that at some point. So he's hanging out on the beach and he's just received this Sonnet 57 from Shakespeare saying, look, I will be your slave. I love you so much. And I'm interested to see how he's going to respond. Let's find out. Christopher Marlowe finishes reading Sonnet 57. He looks down at Mercutio, who looks up at him, and he says to the cat, this is very odd, isn't it? And Mercutio nods slowly. Christopher Marlowe thinks, that cat seemed to understand me. That's pretty strange. And then he thinks to himself, well, if this Shakespeare fellow will really be my slave, I wonder how far I can push this, what I can ask him to do. So he quickly gets out his quill, that he has on him at all times, of course, because he's a writer. And he scrawls down a message back to Shakespeare saying, Dear slave, just so I'm getting this straight, you're going to be my slave and I can do whatever I want. Is that right? can I go off and sleep with other people and all of that, and just have a good time in general, and you just be waiting for me as my slave? What other things might you do as my slave, just out of curiosity? Tell me a bit more about how you would be my slave. All the best, Christopher Marlowe. And he hands the message to Mercutio, who silently takes it in his paw and pops it in his pocket. He has some trousers on at this point. He has little cat trousers. And Christopher Marlowe says, "Oh, before you go, you should have a pina colada with me on the beach. It's really nice." And Mercutio thinks, well, why the hell not? It's a long journey back. I might as well be pissed for it. So he does, and they enjoy a lovely pina colada as the sun sets quite spectacularly over Barbados. After a few pina coladas, Mercutio makes his way back to London. It takes him absolutely ages, a couple of months in fact, because he's a bit drunk and he keeps drinking along the way. People keep giving him free drinks, which is nice in a way, but also he does need to get back to Shakespeare. So he arrives at Shakespeare's door a couple of months later, a bit bedraggled, probably slightly addicted to alcohol now, which is not ideal. And Shakespeare answers the door and says, "Bloody hell, Mercutio, you smell like a brewery." And Mercutio hauls himself into Shakespeare's kitchen. And Shakespeare retrieves the message from Mercutio, which is obviously a bit brown and yellowed, and it's had better days, that message. But Shakespeare can still make out the original message from Christopher Marlowe. And he reads it and then rereads it and says, "Oh my God, he's okay with me being his slave. Yippee! I can't wait to be Christopher Marlowe's slave. I can't believe he's accepted this." And Mercutio looks up at him and rolls his eyes, as if to say, of course he's accepting it. You're saying you're going to be his slave. It's a free slave. So Shakespeare thinks, I need to tell him a little bit more about how I'm going to be his slave and what he can get up to. So I better write another sonnet. He goes up to his little writer's room and he pens Sonnet 58, which details how he will wait for him and how Christopher Marlowe can go off and do whatever he wants, sleep with whoever he wants, and he'll just wait around and hope to be called upon at some point and hope to see Christopher Marlowe at some point. When he'd finished, he called Mercutio back to him and says, Mercutio, I have a little errand for you to run." And Mercutio looks up at him as if to say, "Please, no, not back to Barbados. That's insane. I've literally just arrived back. It took months. And I'm an alcoholic now, for God's sake." And Shakespeare says, "I need you to go back to Barbados and deliver this message to Christopher Marlowe, explaining how I'm going to be his slave and what he can get up to and stuff." And Mercutio says, "Who the hell is the real slave here? I think you know. I think you and I both know I'm the slave here. All right? So what am I, the slave of the slave? This is rubbish. I hate this. But hopefully I can be fed some more alcohol on my journey back to Barbados, and at least Christopher Marlowe will have a pina colada waiting for me when I arrive." So he semi-reluctantly, takes the Sonnet 58 from Shakespeare and begins his long journey back to Barbados, over the stormy seas, across different continents, drinking all sorts of alcohol along the way. I mean, he is fully addicted now, and it's a sad, sorry state of affairs, but at least he's carrying out his duties to Shakespeare. What a good cat he is. Finally, he arrives back to Barbados, and he sees Christopher Marlowe sat on the beach with a couple of hunky young men surrounding him, stroking his pecs and six-pack, and generally doting upon him. Mercutio slowly makes his way up to Christopher Marlowe and drops the sonnet at his feet. Christopher Marlowe says, "Ah, there you are, Cattykins." Mercutio hates the name Cattykins, but of course Christopher Marlowe wouldn't know his real name. And Christopher Marlowe says, "Ah, what have we here? Another sonnet from my slave, William Shakespeare. Let's have a little read, shall we?" And he opens up the sonnet and reads, Sonnet 58. That God who decided to make me your slave, may he never allow me to even think about having any control over when we see each other, or let me ask what you've been up to recently. I'm your vassal, forced to hang around until you want me. Oh, let me suffer while I wait for you. I will endure these lengthy absences without accusing you of hurting me. Go wherever you want, honestly. It is your privilege to do whatever you want. You can even pardon yourself of any crime you do. I have to wait, although waiting is hellish, and not blame you for following your pleasures, whether it's for good or bad. Well, there we are, Sonnet 58, another sonnet about Shakespeare saying that he will be a slave to his lover. And our story is really taking some crazy turns. I mean, we've got an alcoholic cat, which is not something I saw coming, to be quite honest. And I feel bad for Mercutio more than anyone, really, at the moment. The poor bastard. Anyway, until next week, bye-bye.